Hey there, I'm Lonnie Lopez, and on today's episode of One Timeout Left, we have Coach Jason Starkey, coached in the high school ranks for over 10 years, which included coaching at Pace High School, Lopez High School, and St. Joseph High School, which are all located in Brownsville, Texas. Currently, he is the president of Gallery Homes, who owns and developed the South Padre Island Golf Course community in Laguna Vista. Welcome, Coach Jason Starkey.
Thanks for having me, Coach.
Coach, well, you're not from the Rio Grande Valley. You're from West Virginia, which is pretty far from the Rio Grande Valley, but I wanted to take us back there. You grew up, you graduated from Cabell Midland High School in 1995. You said you were the first class there. The school had just opened up? Or?
Yeah, it was a consolidated school. They actually consolidated the high school, Barbersville, which is where I went, and both my older brothers attended, and our local rival, which was Milton High School. So, all I ever wanted to do growing up was graduate from Barbersville, and I ended up being the first graduating class from Cabell Midland. But Cabell Midland's got a great history. I graduated in '95. They've competed for state titles multiple times in football. They've won half dozen in track. They've done great things in baseball, softball. So athletically, it's a really good school. At the time, it was the biggest school in West Virginia, but that was a trend that started in '95, and so a lot of schools consolidated. And so, 3,000 is kind of the average attendance for schools that size back home.
And growing up in West Virginia, did you play any other sports other than football?
I grew up playing basketball. Actually, first sport I ever played was soccer. So my dad grew up in a smaller town called New Martinsville. He went to Magnolia High School. So Barbersville and Cabell Midland was a 3A, which is the biggest classification still to this day in West Virginia. And as I mentioned, there's 3,000, that attended the school I went to. Well, he went to a school similar in size to St. Joseph Academy. There's about 300 kids that went there as single A. New Martinsville is where he's from. And in that community, you weren't allowed to play contact football until you were in ninth grade. So there was no Pop Warner. Obviously, there's no 7-on-7 back in the 60s. So he instilled that principle in our house, and I wasn't too happy about it because I grew up on the sidelines of a football field watching both of my older brothers play for Barbersville High School. I was the water boy, waiting for a time and play so I could get out on the field and be a part of the Friday night lights. So because I wasn't allowed to play the game I wanted to always play, soccer was introduced in my life. And I'm pleased to report I'm probably the worst soccer player you're ever going to meet, Coach. We played in a co-ed league through the YMCA. My mom worked at the YMCA, so girls and boys were competing at this young age. And the team I was on for 7 years never won one game. We actually only scored one goal, and I scored it.
Okay.
But it was for the other team.
Oh.
It was an own goal. So needless to say, I hated soccer. I got a lot of red cards and yellow cards. I was just, my feet were huge and I wasn't very athletic. And I'll never forget at a young age, my 7th year playing in that sport, was probably 12 at the time. And I went to my dad, it was about midway through the season. I'm like, Dad, I was just frustrated. I don't want to play soccer anymore. We don't win. We're a terrible team. We're getting beat by girls, for God's sake. One of those girls went on to play in the WNBA, Letitia Harless, actually. She played at WVU. She was extremely outstanding athlete. But we didn't know that then, right? So I'm like, Dad, I just want to quit. I don't want to play anymore. This is terrible. It's an awful experience. And I'll never forget, because it had been easy for my dad to say, okay, fine. You don't have to pay for any more cleats or shin guards or outfits or host the halftime, snacks. Drive the distance. He had to drive to get me to practice every night, but he didn't. He said, you know what, in this family, son, you start something, you finish it. And so you're going to finish this year. And if at the end of this year you never want to play soccer again, you never have to play. But you're going to see it through. It was a lesson that always, stayed with me about you put your name on something, you're going to do it,
yes.
And you're going to do it well. Even though I was terrible at soccer, it taught me the lifelong lesson of I'm going to see it through. But we never won a game, and I'm terrible at soccer. And when that season ended, I was happy to take him on his offer. We're done, right? We're done. We're not playing more soccer. Played basketball too, enjoyed basketball. But in high school, I just gravitated towards football, played football. I did powerlifting. That wasn't a school-sanctioned sport in West Virginia, so I had to go through the United States Powerlifting Federation and had some success in powerlifting at a young age with some older kids that got me involved in that. But really, it just became football in the high school years.
You say you had two older brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Now I was going to ask, are you the biggest one of the brothers, or probably the smallest one, or the middle one?
I'm not the meanest one, but I'm definitely the biggest one. I stand taller than everyone in my family, which used to be a joke. You know, they used to kid that I was the product of the milkman's, but I look too much like Dad for that to be true. But yeah, I'm 6'5". I think my oldest brother Jimmy might be 6'2". My middle brother Jeff's definitely 6 foot. Dad was 6'1". Mom's probably 5'8". So yeah, I'm the biggest. I'd like to think the best looking too, but I'm 10 years younger than Jimmy and 7 years younger than Jeff, so we're all getting old.
Um, Coach, and when you said you were more gravitated towards football when you were in high school, you went on to go play at Marshall University, which I mean has a historic, the Thundering Herd and all that type of stuff. Even made a movie about the accident or the plane crash back in the 70s. With that, Coach, when you came out of high school, did you play center there in high school the whole time, or you were playing a different position?
I played defensive end my junior year. Actually, I was an all-state defensive end selection, and going into my junior year, and I played offensive line also. We ran the wing T, so we had three plays. The trap, the sweep, and the bootleg. And we'd change it up, every few games and throw the ball once, to catch you off guard. But so I played offensive line, defensive line, but I was an all-state selection defensive end. But a funny story there is my sophomore year, I worked my way through special teams, started on JV. That's something I tell my kids all the time that I work with at a young age. Like, look, I played on JV as a sophomore and had to work my way out of that. It's not how you start your sophomore season or junior season, it's how you finish it. So I finished on the field at defensive end. We went into the playoffs, had a long run, didn't win state, but went deep into the playoffs, and then was all state selected going into the preseason my junior year. Long story short, going into the playoffs my junior year, I got fired from the defensive end position because in that 4-3 defense, we were responsible for contain. And, I got in my own head about how good I thought I was and how many plays I wanted to make for my team. Became really selfish, honestly. It was a great lesson. Coach Thornburg, who's like a father figure to me, Coach T is what we call him back home. He coached in that area for 40 years. Fired me, and he coached both my brothers. He was like a dad to me. I played offensive line, played all special teams. Went on my senior year, played nose tackle. But I was a pulling guard on the offensive line. So I was recruited to Marshall to play defensive end. Actually, when I graduated high school, I won this award back home. They call it the Hunt Award. And the sports writers vote on it and give it to their opinion of the best lineman in the state of West Virginia. I was humbled to receive that because, in my opinion, still to this day, I wasn't the best lineman that graduated in 1995. That would have gone to Mike Williams, in my opinion, from Beckley, who was 6'5", 270, left tackle. He ended up being my teammate and co-captain at Marshall. Started for 4 years at Marshall. Got into the Cleveland Browns camp. Just an outstanding human being, but also, in my opinion, the best lineman in '95. But they gave it to me. This skinny 6'4", 210-pound lineman who got fired the previous year at defensive end. And just so you know, Coach, all the other awards, they give a Kennedy Award for the most athletic, outstanding athlete in football. They give the basketball award for MVP. They give the track award. Well, all those awards went to a young man named Randy Moss. And so I was the only one that wasn't named Randy that won an award that banquet. He gave 3 speeches. I gave 1. And I think I talked longer in 1 than he did in all 3 of his. But yeah.
Oh, man. That Randy Moss. I want to get to that part too because I think that's a whole other. I think would be a full podcast episode on itself, right? But when you went to Marshall, were you recruited by any other colleges before you went to Marshall, or decided on Marshall?
It's a great question, Coach. One I'd like to elaborate on. So I've got a little bit of mail. Recruiting process has changed incredibly. I know that now, having had kids and coach and try to help kids get into college. But back then, it was you get mail. You get mail, and if you're really fortunate, you'll get a visit on campus by coaches. And so the only school that ever visited my campus was Marshall. But mail that I received was from Penn State, from WVU, which, if I'm being honest, and people back home that watch this will probably get on me, but I wanted to play for the Mountaineers growing up. I mean, that was the state school. My dad played for Marshall. We didn't talk about that a lot. We can get into that later. But it was directly related for the plane crash and that trauma that happened to him. But the reason I didn't really get recruited any further than the letters that I got from WU and Penn State was because my academics was just not great. I'd lost focus. Now during football season, I knew I had to stay eligible, so I'm sitting in the front row doing all the right things, having the grades where I need them to be so that I can compete. But in the off season, I would skip class. I wasn't a great student, somewhat of a class clown, just trying to seek attention from my peers, acting out. Had some great adults in the room that really tried to rein me in and mentor me through this season of my life. But because of that, when it was time to take the ACTs, I had to take the ACTs. I know the SATs, the more popular test. I had to take it 4 times. 4 times. And it was the sum of the 4 scores that finally got me the minimum requirement to get into a school at Marshall. And that happened June after I'd graduated from high school. And so even though Marshall was geared up and ready to give me a scholarship, they gave it to someone else. And I had to walk on to Marshall because of my inability to focus in the classroom and pay attention to what matters most for a student athlete, and that's being a student first.
Yeah, very true, very true. So that's a good thing to talk about, because we got to remind students as well that you're a student first before you're an athlete. I always tell them it's the fun part. You get the fun part, but you got to do this part to get to the fun part. So you ended up going to Marshall. Did you? How far is it from your hometown?
I lived with my dad and commuted, so it was about a 15-minute drive for me. Okay. And I just think that was a perfect arrangement for me too. Just kind of the student I was. I really needed the presence of my father and my stepmother and my mom and my little support group. I needed to come home every night. I was in a lot of remedial classes my first year. 095 math, 095 English. The credits weren't even counting because I did so poorly in high school. And so I had to really fast track, my college academics in order to catch up to where I should have been arriving on campus. It was a lot of work and a lot of sacrifice. One that I'm grateful that I was so scared of losing the opportunity to play football that I didn't go out on the weekends hardly at all. And so my first year I was really locked in and disciplined. But I commuted from the house, about a 15-minute drive to get to Marshall.
And when you got to Marshall and academics and the athletic part, did you come in right off the bat starting as they got you recruited for defensive end? Or?
That's a good story too, Coach. So the defensive coordinator is a man named Mickey Matthews. Coach Matthews has gone on to have an incredible career, in coaching in college, but also as a mentor to young men. So Coach Matthews had a daughter named Meredith. Meredith was in my class at Cabell Midland, good friend of mine. We attended dances together. Now I was always smart because I knew who her dad was, and I didn't want to mess that up any further than I already had. So we had a relationship. Before my first practice at Marshall, it was actually the night before, in 2 days, we would go stay in the dorms. And so they were actually kind of 3 days back then. The night before my first practice, Coach Matthews calls me into his office and sits me down and has a real upfront conversation with me about my future at Marshall. And so here's a coach and a man I respected and had a relationship with. And basically he was laying out for me like, Jason, I know you're here to play defensive end. We recruited you to play defensive end, but I just got to be honest with you. We have a lot of talent at that position. They had All-Americans there, B.J. Cohen, and we had draft picks that I played with, Paul Tobiesi. There was a lot. There was a lot already there. Duncan, and they had won championships. And he was just laying it out for me. He's like, you can stay at defensive end, but honestly, I don't see you cracking the lineup till maybe your senior year. However, if you would consider going to play offensive line, keep in mind I'm 210 pounds, by the way. I'm not even big enough to play DN. Because if you would play offensive line, we don't have very many centers. And I believe that there's a future for you playing that position. Are you open to making the change? Night before my first practice. Like, I've got all kinds of anxiety about playing college ball the next day. And now, the night before, I get introduced this. I'm just grateful I was in a place where I was willing to accept the challenge and the opportunity. I looked at it as an opportunity, not as rejection, but maybe as God's protection. And I told him, look, Coach, I just want to play. I want to help this team win. So I'm willing to do whatever. So I reported to the offensive line the next day. Now, I want to give you this context, too. I don't come from much, Coach Lopez. My dad, blue-collar worker. Mom worked at the YMCA. We were low middle class. When I wanted to go to college, I realized I was only going to be the second person to ever attend college in my immediate family. My dad was the only other. My oldest brother went to the Marines. My middle brother is a welder, master welder. He set me down, my father and his family, I'll never forget. And he says, Jason, I know you want to play college ball, but I need you to know that we can't afford college. Now, he put some money together to get me through that first year, but he challenged me. He said, look, you can walk on and we can get you through the first year, but if you don't get a scholarship, then you're going to have to quit the team and get a job, which is invariably what he did in his career because of far different reasons. But so I went into my first camp with that kind of pressure. The night before, I'm no longer a defensive end. Now I'm an offensive lineman. And then the story actually continues. I made the roster for our first game, my true freshman year. We went down to NC State, and I was so proud to have, my dad's name on the back of my jersey, the Marshall jersey, and there was probably 70,000 fans, a packed house at NC State. Now, the game wasn't going our way. And so much so, the starting center got hurt and taken off the field. The backup center also got hurt and taken off the field. In the second half, the guard that we moved over to play center was injured and helped off the field. Now, at this time, they called a timeout. And I'm sure the coaches are talking about what are we going to do, right?
Yeah.
And I'm literally the only person, coach, on the sidelines to ever snap the football in practice. And coming to this realization, I began to buckle up my helmet, all 210 pounds of me. And I'll never forget Coach Selfo, my offensive line. He walked by me on the sidelines. He saw me getting ready. He stopped. He looked at me. And he says, don't worry, Starkey. As long as I'm here, you'll never get in the game.
Really?
And it kind of broke my heart, But I got to be honest, a part of me was relieved because centers were dropping like flies that day. When I got home, I met with the head coach, and the head coach was Coach Donnan. And Coach Donnan set me down and said, we're going to redshirt you, which basically means I'm not going to travel for another game. I'm going to be on the practice squad, hold dummies, and just serve the team in that way. Now, in the back of my mind, Coach Selfo says I'm never going to play as long as he's there. I got my dad pre-game speech saying if you don't get a scholarship this year, then you're going to have to quit the team and get a job. And so my why became in that moment that no matter what, I'm not quitting. Because that other lesson my dad gave me you start something, you're going to finish it, right? And this wasn't soccer we were talking about. This is the game that I always wanted to play. And so I adopted this work ethic where I was going to be the first one there, the last one to leave. I was going to do extras. I was going to hold bags. I was going to run scout team, like the game depended on it. I just adopted this mindset that I was going to do whatever it takes to make an impression, not knowing, if anybody else in my world outside of my control is going to come through with their promises. I was just going to focus on the things that I could control one day at a time. And invariably, the story plays out where Donnan went to Georgia and that whole staff went with him that spring. A new staff came in, Coach Pruitt, who was my head coach. He was a defensive coordinator and former alum at Marshall, played at Marshall. He came in from Florida and brought in a whole new staff. And to me, in the spring, a new opportunity was born to earn a scholarship. And we got reimbursed that first year's tuition. Dad got a check in the mail. So it all ended up obviously working out.
Oh, phenomenal. Great story on that one. Because, the mindset, you were about, 19, 20, 21, maybe 19, 20. And you were that young age to have that mindset to change, to figure out, this, even though you felt pressures from all sides, you told yourself, hey, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to focus on this, which is very a tribute to you, probably growing up and how you were raised and stuff. So great things to share. Along the way, when you marshal, so you're going in and you earned that spot for center for the next 3 years. When that earned, you ended up you were selected as a 2-time all-conference selection, and you were chosen as a captain. Is that by the players or by the coaches?
By the players, which to me is the greatest recognition I've ever received. Because one thing you got to understand, Coach Lopez, especially about that team, is I was surrounded by incredible athletes, but even better men. I have a lot of friendships through the game. Some of my closest brothers are from that team. And so for them, it was coming out of my sophomore year. Now, my sophomore year, which was my redshirt sophomore year, is the third year I was actually in Marshall, but it's my redshirt sophomore year. I got to start 3 games. Now, I've gained a little weight, but I was probably 235 pounds soaking wet. And they actually had me playing tackle. I was the 6th man. The sophomore year was the first year we went D1. My redshirt freshman year, the second year I was there, was Randy Moss's first year, and that was our last year being 1AA, which is now the D1 FCS program that UTRGV's in. So we went 15-0 with Randy, won a national title in Division 1AA.
1AA.
And I got in almost every game because, well, we had Randy and a bunch of other guys, and we were blowing everybody out. So I got to play, the fourth quarter. My sophomore year comes along. I'm the sixth man. We open up at WVU. We ended up losing that game. We were ahead with minutes left, but we just couldn't hold them, and it was a classic game that we lost. I played every position that first game, both tackles, both guards, and center. And so I kind of became the sixth man my sophomore year. I earned a starting job for 3 games at right tackle, and then that was, I lost that job after we played Miami-Ville High, and I single-handedly probably lost that game for our team. I gave up pressures on Chad. I gave up I was supposed to chop the defensive end. Well, he played me back, tipped it, intercepted it, took it to the house. Yeah. I mean, I was on suicide watch on the bus coming home. So obviously I lost my job, but they still rotated me in, and that was my redshirt sophomore experience. Well, in the spring that occurred between that season and my junior season, my team voted me captain. And the way that was revealed to me is it got called to the head coach office again, this time with a group of other people that I respected. And we all sat down. Now, I knew all of them were well respected. Chad Pennington, Mike Williams, Doug Chapman, Rogers, Beckett, John Grace, all guys went on to have illustrious careers beyond college. And so I'm sitting in this room with them. I realize I'm probably not in trouble because of the people I've got with me. And then when he told us, he goes, "Look, guys, we're in here because you've been selected as this year's captains." And then he looks at me, he goes, "I have no idea why you're on the list." And Coach Pruitt to this day is one of my greatest mentors and friends. He's a great man. I think he loves me because his wife loves me so much, Elsie. But they selected me to be a captain. We went on to go 12-1. We should have went 13-0, but we caught slipping in Bowling Green. Won the MAC conference that year. Won a bowl game that year against Louisville. That's when Redmond was the quarterback, and then went on to get voted again my senior year. We went 13-0 and finished 10th in the nation. So, being surrounded by those kind of guys. There was 11 guys my senior year win the NFL. On that team, with the underclassmen included, there's 20 guys, and I think 9 of them were drafted. So for those men to respect me, because honestly, that's why I played the game. Because playing offensive line's hard.
Yeah.
It actually sucks. When I mentor kids, I remind them of that. Like, I didn't really enjoy practice. I didn't really enjoy the things that were required of an offensive lineman in order to, play that game at a high level at that position. But the reason I did it and signed up to do it and did it passionately is because I cared so much about the guy on the right and left side of me, and the guy specifically behind me wearing number 10. Like, he's one of my closest friends to this day. And as I mentor kids, I'm telling them, as you're challenged by the passion of the game, I encourage them to invest in the passion of their teammates. Because as that passion and relationship grows, their passion for the game they play and their role and the selflessness that it requires will grow as well. Because that's my story.
Coach, and you talk about the passion and stuff, and you were surrounded by some great players. I do want to take a little time because I think I know people will be asking me afterwards if I didn't ask this question. Talk to me a little bit about Chad Pennington and playing with Randy Moss. Talk to me a little bit about them. Did you saw him in practice? Did you see him outside of practice? I know you were more structured and you would go home and stuff, but I mean, Chad Pennington, as you see him on TV, you think Chad Pennington over here is probably one of the quiet ones, just a quiet leader, does his work. Then you got Randy Moss, who's a leader, but very boisterous and loud and stuff. How does that resonate? How do you talk about those a little bit?
Of course. I've always been blessed to be surrounded by great athletes, great men, giants of the game, if you will, Hall of Famers. Randy's one of them. I'll start with him. So Randy was actually in my division in high school. So I played against him in high school in the regular season and then in the playoffs. I mean, he's one of the main reasons we never won a state championship in Barbersville or Cabell Midland. He had great teammates too. Bobby Howard was another one. In a little place called Rand, West Virginia. I don't know if you ever watched that documentary called Rand U. They do a really good job of talking about that part of our little state. But DuPont High is where he played. So I hated him in high school. I mean, if I'm being honest, he was skinny. He was the fastest guy on the field. His most gifted guy on the field. He never came off the field. He was their punter, their place kicker, their field goal kicker, their returner, their wide receiver, their safety. So I didn't like him in high school. In college, I absolutely loved him. And what you see on film is not what we were getting in the locker room. He's one of the most loving, compassionate, quiet team members I had. He was not the center of attention. That was probably more me than it was him. But he was the guy that wanted the ball when it mattered most. I mean, he was the Michael Jordan of our team. When the game was on the line, he just said, throw it up there, Chad. Like, I'll make a play. And we all knew he would. So we'd fight our tails off to keep him off Chad so he could do that. He would do things in practice that were just incredible. I mean, he would catch the ball and hide it. Before mossing someone was ever a thing, I seen that guy catch it on top of people's heads, practice after coming in as a rookie, you know, because his story was he was supposed to go to Notre Dame.
Yes,
and then he went to Florida State. Then he failed a drug test for marijuana, right, which today is legal. You know, and back then he was only in that situation because of a racial, you know, tension that was going on in his world in DuPont. And the kid that he had an altercation with ended up being the son of an attorney. And then, you know, Randy couldn't, you know, have a good enough case to support the fact he was just defending himself. But long story short, situations in his life led to where we got him at Marshall, and we were thankful to get him because back then you couldn't just bounce around.
Yeah.
So he dropped down to 1AA so he didn't lose a year of eligibility, knowing the following year we were going up to Division I. So the circumstances worked out really well for Randy, I think. They scored 52 touchdowns in 2 years receiving. So he was exceptional talent. He was fun to watch. Chad, on the other hand, Chad's probably the best human being I've ever met. 100% product of the parents that raised him, 2 educators and a football coach. Coach Elwood Pennington, Denise Pennington. He has a sister, you know, Andrea. Just an incredible family. He has a presence even to this day. When he's in the room, he just makes me want to be a better person. He leads with the faith, but he's not a outspoken evangelist. He walks the talk. And that's the type of football player he was. You know, Chad made it a point not only to master his position from an intellectual standpoint and preparedness, but he wanted to know every protection, every blocking scheme in the running game. One thing that still to this day upsets me is when I see a play action, or more importantly, just a running play, and a quarterback doesn't carry out a fake like he's going to throw the ball, or carry out his boot to try to bring the safety over, the outside linebacker freeze. You know, it really irritates me because I played for a quarterback that did everything right. Like every little detail mattered to him. So, and that carried all the way through his NFL career. But in our case, we took a lot of responsibility on being great as a team. I had 5 offensive coordinators in my 5 years at Marshall. I had 2 head coaches. I had 3 offensive line coaches. And so at a young age, the core of Marshall decided if we're going to be successful, it's up to us. Yeah. Back then, you weren't portaling out for a bad day or, a coach getting on your tail. So we all bought into a high level of accountability and high level of competitiveness, and that was really born from the example that Chad Pennington set on and off the field. All summer, you'd go to the facility anytime you want, and you'd see Chad in there with the wide receivers working on all the plays. He would run a practice without the presence of a coach. So that's the reason we were great. That's the reason we were in every game we played. We just believed in people like Chad. And Chad was just one example of a couple dozen men that carried that level of accountability and competitiveness. It wasn't a part-time arrangement for any of us. And it didn't matter if we were in the weight room maxing out or just doing a workout. We were always competing with each other to be better or one-up each other. And then we let each other hear about it. It was some of the greatest years of my life. But I want to set the record straight. I don't want to mislead anyone on the podcast or you, Coach. I wasn't a straight arrow. Chad was. But that first year where I really bought in and I had to do the academics, eventually I strayed from that. And I started going to the bars and drinking, on the weekends. I never really let it interfere with the game, but it definitely crept its fingers into the early parts of the week and in the spring. I started doing things, I'm not proud of. We can unpack that later as we talk about me getting out of college. But, college for me really became a world where I lived 2 different lives. I was this hometown hero, this walk-on who earned scholarship, who's a team captain and an all-conference selection. I'm speaking at my elementary school on Jason Starkey Day. I'm doing all these things for my community. But then I'm the guy shutting the bar down, making choices around drugs and alcohol that were nothing I'm proud of to this day, but absolutely a part of my story as well. And I lived this double life. It's so much so that when we'd get drug tested, I'd be put in a position where I'd have to ask others to pee for me. And then I'd have to carry their urine into that arrangement, try not to get caught. So the insanity that started to creep into my life at this season of my life was really extreme and became overwhelming. And I didn't tell anybody about it. It was something that I just fought on my own. And that's kind of what that looked like.
We're gonna get to that part, Coach. So as you transition, you're in college playing Marshall in your senior year. When did you kind of feel that NFL was an opportunity that might come about? How did that come about?
For me, honestly, it was after my senior year. It was never really anything I was considering as I played the game. I never even was the kid that dreamed of playing the NFL. I mean, we talked about it off camera. I had Walter Payton posters all over my room. I was, all of my family in West Virginia were Steelers fans, because they were a product of the 70s. But in 85, if you weren't a Bears fan, you weren't American, in my opinion, right? So I'm laying on the floor at the age of 8, playing with my G.I. Joes, my Star Wars figures, acting like I'm a coach, drawing up the play to win the game for the Chicago Bears, because the Super Bowl shuffle and all that was something. But I never dreamed I would ever play, ever. Because I started in some degree believing some of the voices in my world that says I was too small, too slow, too weak, too dumb. There's a lot of people in everyone's life, I believe, that'll tell you what they think you are or not, but the trick for athletes or men, I think, is to not buy into the lies of this world, but to make your own truth and walk in a path that is going to get you there. So to answer your question, never really dreamed of playing the NFL. I never dreamed of playing college ball. I think this is an important message too for young people. I believe the college opportunity I was eventually given was born from the daily routine where I was just focused on being great that day. And the only thing that drove me to try to be great in high school, one day at a time, was again, the relationships I formed with my brothers in high school. I didn't want to let them down. I wanted to earn the respect of my teammates and the trust of my coach and bring honor to my dad's name. Those are the 3 things that motivated me. And I couldn't articulate that back then, but that is 100% what drove me. And so one day at a time, as I'm trying to earn the trust of the coach, earn the respect of my teammates, and bring honor to my dad's name, I began to work my way through the ranks. And then Marshall showed up, did the same thing in Marshall. And then this agent shows up. And it was as everyone was preparing for the combines and the Marshall workouts, you're like, Jason, we think you should work out. And I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah, you're ranked in the top 12 centers at your position. Now, they may not draft that many centers, but we feel like when the dust clears from the draft, that you might get an opportunity to play ball somewhere. So they started to talk to me, this agency, and they were representing some other of my teammates. And so I began to train in the off season after my senior year, and I trained alongside a lot of great guys that didn't, our running back went to the Vikings, our safety went to the Chargers. Chad obviously was the first quarterback selected in the 2000 draft. The 6th quarterback was Tom. Everybody remembers that guy, but I'm a fan of Chad. And then we had one other draft pick, and he's going to kill me if he sees this. I can't remember who it was, but we had 4 drafted that class. I'll think of it later. I think it was Andre O'Neal with the Kansas City Chiefs. So I trained with all those guys, and 11 of us got into camp. But I never dreamed that was going to be a reality for me. And, honestly, it wasn't. When the draft was over, I watched it with my dad all 3 days. My name didn't get called. And then as my phone started ringing when the draft was over, it was my friends. Hey, you get a call yet? I just got a call from Cleveland. Mike Williams called. I'm going to the Browns. Another one called. I just got a call from the Colts. I'm going to their camp. And so when that passed, week became 2 weeks, and the agent's like, look, man, there's enough interest there, but no one's inviting you to camp. But there's a lot of arena teams that are interested. And I didn't even know what arena football was.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, what's arena football? And they're like, well, it's an indoor deal. They play with less players, I think 7 or whatever. I'm like, well, who's interested in me there? Well, Albany, New York. They just won they just won the championship. I'm I'm like, I'm not going to New York. Columbus, that's not far away enough from home. And they said Tampa Bay, Florida. I said, that might have a chance. So went to Tampa Bay, played arena ball for 5 weeks, finally cracked into the lineup there, played the worst game of my career because you got to play both ways. I was getting $900 a week in housing. And but all of my special performance bonuses were based on the defensive side of the ball because I was under contract to be the center. So, I'm trying to get a sack, I'm trying to get a fumble, I'm trying to make a play because then you get like $50, $150, whatever. Well, I gas myself and and when you shift on an arena, you can't shift off till the quarter ends. And so anyway, I had a terrible game, gave up a lot of pressures, went home that night just questioning everything, and then it turns out I had a voicemail on my answer machine. For all your young viewers, that's a machine that used to have a tape in it. And when the light blinks, that means somebody left you a message. You didn't have these things back then. And so I hit play, and it was this gentleman named Jim Stanley from the Arizona Cardinals. He addressed himself as the lead scout, said they were interested in bringing me out for a physical. And I'm thinking, this is the worst night of my life. I just played the worst game of my life. This has to be a joke. And then the next message was my dad. He's like, Jason, this is your dad. I've just been getting calls from this gentleman named Mr. Stanley. He says he's from the Arizona Cardinals. They're really trying hard to get a hold of you. You need to call him. Here's his number. And so I reached out to him, and I was on a flight the next day.
And they did like a physical.
I had to go out there and get a complete physical because the rest of the story is the center they had, I think he was from Ohio State, didn't pass his physical. He had so many injuries. It's a meat market. They're going to poke and prod you, and if there's, if the doctors can find anything wrong with your joint structure, your body development, it could be a red flag, unless you can catch the ball on top of people's heads and they'll kind of let you have a pass. But when you're on the bubble like I was, you have to pass physical. And so gratefully I passed mine. I went into my first camp in June of 2000, which there had already been OTAs and mini camps. I only had one mini camp and then 2-a-days. And in 2-a-days, I went into camp in Flagstaff. The Arizona Cardinals, there was over 100 guys. I want to say like 113. There was 5 at the center position. As I became a student of rosters, I realized typically teams don't keep more than 2 centers.
Yep.
And sometimes they'll just keep the starter and swing the guard. And so I started doing math and figuring out, like, they're not going to keep me. But no matter what, I'm not quitting. And if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it with everything I got to try to earn the trust of my coaches, the respect of my teammates, bring honor to my dad's last name. And that kind of mindset led to me being selected to be on the practice squad. And because of unfortunate injuries to the starting center, Mike Gruttadori, who won a Super Bowl as a starting center for the greatest show on turf the previous year in 1999. He was Kurt Warner's center at the Rams. Gave him a big contract. Mike's a good friend. He'd had 21 surgeries in the league at that time. And so he was injury prone, unfortunately, at this stage of his career. But, his injury meant that I got upgraded to the roster. And getting upgraded to the roster not only meant a big check that week, right? But it also meant that if I did that 3 times, then that year counted and was vested as a year that counted towards retirement. I ended up getting 6 games that year, and, the rest is history.
When you... in terms of that with being with the Arizona Cardinals, which you played 4 years, right?
Yes, sir.
4 years with them, and you started at 13 NFL games. Who was the quarterback at that time? Who was your quarterback?
Jake the Snake Plummer.
Jake the
from
Snake.
Arizona State University. Good friend of mine as well. I'll say this about Jake. He's a generous human being, as is most of the quarterbacks in that league. They always do a great job of promoting, the community and helping kids. But Jake has a special place in his heart. He helps St. Joe, and St. Joe doesn't even know that. As we do fundraisers, I'll reach out to friends like Jake, and I can always count on him to send a nice, healthy check to the one-on-one club or to other little philanthropist activities that I'm involved in. He's got a great heart. He was a good friend. He actually was a classmate of my wife. My wife graduated from ASU. That team had a few players from ASU. Steve Bush was our tight end, really good friend of mine too. And a young man named Pat Tillman was on that team as well, who a lot of people remember the story of Pat. Pat was an incredible human being. Even though I shared lockers with Randy Moss and, Mean Joe Green was a D-line coach in Arizona, and Chad was obviously my quarterback in college. Emmitt Smith walked into that locker room after Dallas let him go. So I was starstruck too when that happened. I'm not even a Cowboys fan, Coach. and his locker was near mine. But Pat was one of the ones that made the biggest impression on me. You know, my oldest brother's a Marine, and he served our country in 3 conflicts in over 20 years. Military is a big deal in our family, as it is in most families, especially in Texas. And you know, long before Pat ever made that decision with his brother, you know, one of the first impressions he made on me is, I'm a rookie, and no one's talking to me. Well, a couple of Nebraska boys, but they like to drink, so that's how we made friends.
Yeah.
But apart from that, no one really invests in rookies, and I didn't understand why. I mean, the draft picks they're leaning into, but the undrafted free agents like myself, no one was interested. It was a cold locker room. I didn't really understand until I'd been in the league a while, and then when I realized, it's almost like breaking up with your high school sweetheart every single July when the final cuts are made and more than half of the roster is gone.
You don't want to get...
So they don't want to get connected. They're guarding their hearts, if you will, from a relationship, knowing they'll never see you again. And so I'm experiencing that, not knowing what's going on my first year. And I'm sitting around with some other rookies, and we're talking. One of them was a gentleman named Jay Tant. He was, I think he was, what do they call the last pick of the draft?
Mr. Irrelevant?
Irrelevant. I think he was Mr. Irrelevant that year's draft. Jay Tant's his name from Northwestern tight end. And so Jay and I were good friends. Sean Keenan, which invariably was a practice squad quarterback, and my roommate. So we're all sitting in locker rooms talking to little rookies, little cast outs, if you will. And Pat just sits down right beside us out of nowhere. And we're all kind of noticing that he's there, but we're still engaged in conversation. He was respectful enough not to interrupt and wait for a moment to speak. And when he spoke, this is what he said. He looked at Jay and said, hey, sorry to interrupt, guys, but Jay, I was thinking of getting in a triathlon this off season. And I was really hoping that you could find some time to teach me a few pointers in the pool around swimming. Would you be open to doing that? And Jay was kind of taken back. And then he said, of course, you know, like we'll do that. And then he just engaged in the conversation. He brought up Marshall. We'd never met. And then he left. He left that conversation with such an impression that he'd done his homework on us. Not only was just sitting down asking a question and a favor, but he kind of knew who all of us were. Well, none of us knew why I asked Jay that question, and we all considered ourselves friends of Jay. We'd known him the whole camp. I'm like, Jay, why would he ask you for swimming? He goes, it's crazy, but I won state twice as a freestyle swimmer in high school.
Wow.
He must have known that. And now he wants me to... Pat went on to do a triathlon that offseason just to check the box. And he was humble enough to approach a rookie and invest in a little bit of, you know, research to know kind of who we were and where we were from. He was a guy always had a book in his hands, a notebook, a pencil, and a highlighter. Like he was well-read, educated. You know, he was also the guy where we're sitting around the table having a couple beers talking about, hey, you know, I'll give you $100 to jump off that roof and do a can opener in that pool. I'll give you $200. And it's a significantly high, you know, structure. Pat's a guy just climbs up on the roof, jumps off, and then goes and sits down, and doesn't even ask for the money, you know. So he was a great teammate. He loved to fight. He wouldn't back down from nobody. There's a lot of Pat Tillman stories, but I always like sharing that. And I'll finish with this. I want to name our son Tillman. My wife invariably wouldn't let me. She didn't want him to have to try to live up to that legacy or, you know, be told what that name was really about. But that's a great memory I have. Yeah. Thanks for letting me share that.
No, thank you, Coach. So it's NFL. So you play 4 years. I think you're gonna transition out of NFL, right? You transitioned out. Talk to me. You're West Virginia, Arizona, which is a little closer to Texas.
Yeah.
But still from the Rio Grande Valley.
Uh-huh.
How did you get to Rio Grande Valley?
That's a good story in itself. So my wife, Larky Starkey.
Hey,
yeah.
Julia from
the
wedding singer, yeah.
So Larky and I had been married for 7 years at the time. And she's half Mexican and half Irish, which means she can get a little crazy when she drinks tequila or whiskey. No, she's a great woman and my best friend. We came to visit her abuela in the spring of 2010 because her abuela wasn't doing well. She was in a home in Alice, Texas. I was nervous, if I'm being honest. I was perfectly content in Phoenix. I was working for a timeshare organization called Diamond Resorts. I was in marketing. I was a regional marketing manager. I was in charge of Hawaii and Vegas and Scottsdale. And so I would get to stay in these nice places and train staff on marketing. Made a decent living. So no intention of moving to Texas is my point. We just made a time in our schedule to come down and visit Wella and the rest of the familia. And I was nervous because at that time I didn't know any Spanish. I barely know any now. I'm a gringo. I don't know what to expect. So Larky's family really is from the Fremont Corpus area. She was born in Falfurrias, as was her father, who's the Hispanic side of her heritage. And so we came down to a long overdue pachanga in the fields of a Fremont ranch. And it quickly became evident to me that this family was just like my family of origin. They like to cook, they like to talk loud, they like to play country music, they like to tell stories. And so in the few days that we spent there, it really kind of made an impression on me. Now, to your Brownsville question, I know where Brownsville was. There's this athletic trainer named Matt Gross who's been serving this community since 2000. Matt is my oldest friend on the planet. Our parents were neighbors before either of us were born. Both his mom and my mom were present at each of our births, and we grew up going through elementary school, played a lot of pickup basketball together. He's a great basketball player, played football together. He was an athletic trainer at Marshall, so he's the only guy that touched my ankles on game day. We were very close. He's like my brother. And so I'm telling Lark, I'm like, hey, honey, Brownsville's only like an hour and a half drive from here. Can we go see Matt? So we come down to a long overdue trip to see Matt. Matt signs me up to speak, unbeknownst to me, to the Coach Medrano-led Pace Vikings, the NFL friends in town, right? And so he kind of teased this up for me, unbeknownst to me, and I was a little taken back because I hadn't spoke to a football team in some time. And so I was a little nervous and didn't really want to do it, but Matt's a close friend. He's like, please just do it for me. And so I'm like, all right, Matt, I'm going to talk to him, but I'm going to tell him some stuff you might not want to hear. And he's like, man, I don't even care. I just fulfill the obligation I made. So I went in there and I talked to these boys about my real story, the trials and tribulations that came along in my career. Brownsville Veterans was being created. Coach Medrano wanted me to kind of preach to him about staying loyal to Pace and stay at that school and don't go to the new school. He had a great team. And I could only imagine how difficult it was to have his zone cut in half by the school district. But that wasn't the message I gave at all. The message I gave was, at the end of the day, I didn't play for the school. I didn't play for the logo on the helmet. I didn't even play for the coach because I had 5 offensive coordinators, 2 offensive line, 3 offensive lines. I played for the guy on the right and left of me. And those relationships and your willingness to invest in those at this age, well, they can circle back and save your life. And so I began to tell him the story of Chad Pennington and how he saved my life. And I began to talk to him about, the alcoholic and the drug addict that I had become in my career and the state that it took me and the depths that it took me and the brink of bankruptcy and divorce and just all the things that I had lost. And because of an intervention led by my wife and my former quarterback and best friend gave me the help I needed in order to get sober. And so at the end of the day, I was like, I don't care if you go to vets. I don't care if you stay here. Actually, I'm leaving. I'll never see you guys again. But one thing I do care about is that you understand the opportunity you have as a young person right now to connect in this locker room with other young people can forge a relationship that one day is going to pay dividends for you or someone you care about. That's my message. When I was done kind of giving that message, I was approached by the Embado Encinas, a great nose tackle that ended up staying at Pace, and some other kids that usually when kids approach me after speeches, they're like, hey, can I get your autograph? Do you know Randy Moss? Can I get Emmitt Smith's autographs? Right? All appropriate questions for a speaker. With me on this day, a lot of them connected to the brokenness of my story, had stories of their own that they wanted to share. It was so touching that when I left Brownsville, part of me stayed. And so I quickly reached out to Matt and I just started asking about those kids I'd met. How are they doing? And he's like, Jason, they won't stop talking about you. I get chills thinking about it because to me, it was God just moving in mysterious ways. And although I had a great career and a fast track to a good position in that company, it became evident to me that we needed to look at possibly moving. So I started talking to Larky, and I'm like, honey, I think God's telling me we need to move. In our church at that time, we liked the idea of going to Mexico and doing a little Mexican, mission, if you will. And I don't say that to be disrespectful, but honestly, weekend trip to Mexico, or maybe a week, and you go participate in something very good. And our heart was kind of led there. And I posed, I was like, I think this is that mission that we've been praying about. I just don't think it's through our church. I think, it's through our service. I want to go down there and be a coach. So I became a probationary teacher, went through the online certification process, and within 6 months, we loaded a truck and moved to Brownsville. Gave my 2-week notice, had no guarantee of a job, keeping a job. Coach Medrano was kind enough to give me my first opportunity. I can't think of the principal's name right now, but she was kind enough to give me an opportunity in the classroom. Pace took amazing care of me. I had 1 prep, 5 classes. They were just incredible. Like teachers were bringing me tacos. I gained a bunch of weight. The kids were incredible. And unfortunately, I didn't stay at Pace. There was an opportunity that came quite quickly, and it was to be an offense coordinator at Brownsville Lopez High School. And I took that, and it was a tough decision to make. And I ended up leaving the head coach that gave me all those opportunities after just spending 1 season with him. And that was difficult for, I think, him too, but definitely for me. But just that was where I was being called to. And when I got to Southmost, we didn't hit it off right off the bat. Ms. Aguilar wasn't the greatest of principals to work for. She was pretty hard-nosed, and we struggled to win. And Coach Ramirez gave me an opportunity, and I had to learn an offense and install it. Chad flew me out to Knoxville, taught me what they ran in high school. It was a version of wing tee football. I did the best I could to install it. We didn't really score any points. We didn't win any games, and definitely didn't do well because of offense. But then Coach Ramirez started investing in me. I adopted the power. I started studying Stanford. That's where Jim Harbaugh was at the time. I reached out to that staff trying to get some film. Turns out the film guy for Stanford was close friends with the film guy who's a good friend of mine from Marshall. And because of the Marshall connection, sent me everything I wanted. And so we started to run that. And then I was the head coach. And, there's more stories, but I could go on forever.
No, I agree, Coach. In talking, when you became the head coach, that was Coach Michael Ramirez, the one right now. He's in Farmers Branch, Carrollton, around that area. I remember he came out in a commercial a couple of years ago. So you come to Lopez High School, you come to Pace, Coach Medrano, and Michael Ramirez gives you an opportunity. He leaves on, that's where he left to Carrollton and stuff.
Yes, sir.
You became the head coach. You were the head coach there for, I think, 5 years,
Yes, sir.
You said. You took him to the playoffs
Twice
out there, which awesome on your end, because I think you more likely these kids bought into, they're buying into a program which to me it belongs there, it needs to be happening. So back in 2018, 2019, the E60 Southmost football on the border. How did that come into play? Did they reach out to you and Coach Uresti out of Porter, right?
Yeah.
How'd that come about?
So prior to that phone call, I got a phone call from Sports Illustrated, which I was excited about. Because again, that's where I got the Walter Payton pictures, was ripping them out of my Sports Illustrated magazine and putting them up on the wall. Of course, the swimsuit magazine, I had those pictures hidden somewhere else, but Sports Illustrated was a big deal to me. And so when I got a call from a writer from Sports Illustrated that they had heard something about this school that existed on the border, and these challenges that these young people were facing, with family and citizenship and crossing and just getting an education and being safe and all these things that they want to investigate, they asked would I be willing, and just to do a little piece on the football team. And so, I went out and I said yes. And so I went out to tell the team, right? I told some of the coaches, and all the coaches are my age, or older. So they were all excited. Sports Illustrated's coming. So I go out and let me tell them. So I break them up, bring them together, say, hey, Sports Illustrated's coming, and it was like this big reveal. And it was crickets. And I realized in that moment, none of these kids really knew who Sports Illustrated was. None of them had grown up where that was such a big part of the way that they would receive football and sporting content. But to answer your question, the article in Sports Illustrated was read by the people at ESPN. And then Jeremy Williams reached out, and he's the producer for that film, to me and said they'd like to do something more. And I didn't really like that article too much. And it was this hotshot writer out of New York came in for one day. And to me, you can't really do an adequate story on this region or that campus and those kids in one day. One thing I'll say about E60 is they spent 2 years of gathering content and information. And I thought what they put together was incredible. I thought they did a really good job. That actually went beyond me because that was at the tail end of my coaching when I decided to take my current position and leave coaching. They kind of finished it with the coach that finished there, but I thought they did a really good job. But they read that article from Sports Illustrated, and they came invested over a 2-year period of time in the relationships, that led to that. E60 usually does 4 segments in a. They did an entire segment on the Battle of Southmost. And I thought that was incredible. I thought Carlos and his staff and those kids did an incredible job. Those stories were incredible. I got a lot of respect for Coach at Esty and what he does at Porter, because in campuses like Lopez and Porter, the way you measure success is way beyond wins and losses on Friday night. The successes is in what type of young men they create in those schools, and dads and fathers, and I think to that end he's doing incredible. I thought we did pretty decent at Lopez too. Yeah, we went to the playoffs, and it was really what I've proven is a program run by Jason can go 0-10, 2-8, 4-6, but a program where it's about putting quality adults around kids, that we cared more about the kid than we did about the win on Friday, when we really showed our colors, and that's who we were, and that was the DNA of our program. Because a kid doesn't care what you know until they know that you care. And then once they know that, especially those kids, they'll do anything you ask them to. And so when we got the program to that kind of a culture, the Ugaro Ramirez is our defensive coordinator, Coach Barba, our strength coach, proud product of Los Fresnos. He'd be in the weight room at 6 in the morning with 800 pounds on his back, squatting with Metallica playing in the big system that we bought him, and kids were just enamored by that. We're winning state titles in powerlifting, and the mind of the young Southmost athlete was changed. And I followed them still on Facebook. There was 100 kids that showed up at Lopez and Southmost for the first day of summer rec. And it gives me chills to think about it, because that's a good part of this community, and I'm really proud of what they're continuing to do down there.
Coach, you spent 5 years there coaching, and you transition out and go to your current job right now as the homes, with dealing with the homes and the Laguna Vista community there in South Padre Island. Now you're also a professional speaker. And to me, I always think, how did you transition to that? But I want to go back to the part where you had the intervention, because I think I want to get that part of the story of where. So share as much as you can, or whatever you feel comfortable with.
Of course.
Let us talk about that, about the.
No, thank you for asking that. It's definitely a part of who I am, and it was going to be the answer to one of your questions later, but I'll pivot. So Coach Lopez, in July 22nd, 2006, I woke up in my car. I had blankets rolled up in my windows and a covering on my windshield. It was a nice car. It was a Chrysler 300 with 22-inch chrome rims, but it was a terrible house. And it had been acting as my home for almost 2 months. You see, Larky got to a place in her life where she was sick and tired of watching her husband kill himself through alcoholism and addiction. So I woke up in this car, and the truth of my existence at this time was my wife loved me enough to kick me out of her house. And so I was homeless, and I was over $1 million in debt. You see, I was a millionaire by the age of 25, retired NFL football player. But on this day, I'm over $1 million in debt, separated from my wife, parked in the parking lot of a Walgreens, contemplating whether to go in and rob the place of OxyContin. I injured my shoulder going into my second year playing the Chargers, and when I left that game, I was nervous to tell anybody. So I confided in a teammate and asked him, what should I do? And unbeknownst to me, he was a walk-in pharmacy. So when he opened up the lapel of his jacket and he pulled out a bottle of Percocets, he said, you take 2 of these and you don't tell anybody. And so I followed those suggestions to the T. And you know what? pills took me to a place that I'd never been before. But on this day where I woke up in my car, I'm a heroin addict, I'm a cocaine addict, I'm an alcoholic, I'm separated from my wife. No one's taken my call. I've been unemployed. I've been unemployable for over 3 years. And honestly, I wanted to die. I didn't want to live anymore. I was ashamed of what I'd done with my father's name. And I'm sleeping in the Walgreens parking lot in the very city in Phoenix, Arizona, where I used to be a professional football player. And then my phone rang, and it was Lark. And I took the call, and although I don't remember exactly what we talked about, I do remember she asked me to come home. And so when I hung up that phone, I wondered to myself, why would she do that? Because I wasn't a good husband. I was abusive. I was neglective. I stole everything we ever amassed, plus 1.275. We were separated. I just didn't understand the logic behind the request. But I went home. And what was going on is she called Chad the night before and expressed to Chad that she thought I was going to die if something wasn't done. And so the part that amazes me is that Chad's going into his 7th training camp as the face of the New York Jets in this July. He has a lot going on with that kind of pressure. He chooses to hit the pause button and financially run the intervention that became my opportunity. That my best man in our wedding was also a Marshall offensive lineman, flew out Sean Saunders to pick me up that next morning out of the bed and take me to a place I didn't know about, which is in Knoxville, Tennessee. And waiting at the runway of the plane was Coach Pennington, Chad's dad. Now, Coach Pennington was this dad with VIP access to Marshall. I mean, his son was a Heisman, finalist. So he got to be in the locker room, but Coach was also the guy that loved Jesus. And so in that season of my life, I wanted to keep Coach at arm's length. I didn't want to get a sermon about Christ. I didn't want to be brought to the cross. I wanted to get to the keg party and hang out with the girls, if I'm being honest. That's the guy that was at the airport to pick me up that day. And then he took me to a treatment facility called Cornerstone in Knoxville, Tennessee, which is where he and Denise were residing at the time. And when they took me in to check in, we sat around a board table with the execs of that facility, and they all started to present to me what life was going to look like. And at the end of the presentation, they got to the part where there needed to be a transaction. There was a debt that was owed and a payment that needed to be made, and I didn't have it on me. And in that moment, Coach P opened up the lapel of his jacket, and he pulled out a checkbook, and he wrote a check I couldn't cash. A humble high school educator and coach. And he slid it across the table, and he told him, when you need more, you call me. And then he got up from that table, he walked around, and he gave me a hug. And as I wept in his arms, he told me that everything was going to be all right. And I chose to believe him. And I walked into that facility not knowing what the day or the tomorrow was going to look like or how long I was going to stay. And invariably, I stayed 7 months. 30 days in an inpatient facility that introduced me to a program that saved my life. And then 6 months in a sober living community, of which Coach Pennington drove across Knoxville to pick me up almost every day, and definitely on the weekends, and gave me the opportunity to earn a little bit of money, mow his grass, spread mulch, and clean gutters. And in that time, he started telling me about a season in his life where he wasn't batting 1,000 either. And through his testimony and through God's grace, and through a lot of other generosity in my life at that time, I gave my life to Jesus Christ on the dirty floors of a treatment facility, and I made a decision that I couldn't do life without him, and I was ready to let him do all the driving. I'd like to say I got up from that floor and the money was in the bank and the wife wanted me to come home and everything worked out quickly and immediately. It's not my story. But I will tell you this, my story is I've been sober July 25th, 2006, and, in this July I'll have 19 years. And Coach Pennington acted as one of my mentors until he left this earth. And at the time he died, the family called me and wanted me to come to the funeral. And I didn't have the money to get there. And again, Chad's like, you're coming. I've already got the ticket. When I got there, I thought I'd be one of the few people there that have a story like this. And what turns out, it was a sanctuary filled with hundreds, if not 1,000 people that had stories similar to mine. A life that was lived so well by a man who cared so much about bringing people to Christ and walking the talk. And in that moment, I knew why Chad was so special to me always. It wasn't because he was a great quarterback. It was because he was a great human being who was raised correctly by a good man. And, So today, to the extent which is possible now that life looks a little differently for me, I've been married, coming up on 23 years. Larky would say happily for almost 19. I got 2 kids that's never seen me high or drunk. I've got an amazing friendship with not only Chad, but so many other anonymous men in my life that I love serving and sharing this testimony with, and the plan that can get you out of the depths of addiction and alcoholism. So these speaking engagements, they were never paid. And in the anonymous rooms of this world, they're never paid. But there was this one lady named Dr. Zendejas, who was the superintendent of Brownsville Independent School District. And her and I became close in my time of service there. And we got into some philanthropy for the local community. And in that, she had me speak. And long story short, my first paid engagement was managed by Dr. Zendejas. She asked me what I was doing some June a couple years ago. When I said nothing, she had me right where she wanted me. She said, well, then you're coming to the island. You're going to be the keynote speaker for a superintendent convention for Region 2, and we're going to pay you. And no is not an answer. And so I spoke to a bunch of superintendents, and I led with the fact that I'm the least qualified person to be given the keynote at a room full of doctors and superintendents, because I was expelled once from school. I couldn't make the grades once to get into college. I had to take the ACT 4 times. But I go on to talk about my story, and at the end of that, a lot of those superintendents circle back. So I'd like you to come to my school district. I need you to talk to my kids. I'd like you to speak to my faculty. And then the cool ones is through FCA work. I got a chance to go speak to our special forces, in Fort Campbell, the 101st Airborne 5th Group. I'm going home to speak to Marshall on the 11th next week. And as real recently, I've always wanted to reconnect with the NFL fraternity. Chad's tried countless times, but there's this one young man I'm working through, in the anonymous rooms of recovery, and he brought it up to me that he's really connected with the National Football League Players Association through some philanthropy he does. Long story short, it looks like I'll be speaking for Vegas Raiders and possibly the New England Patriots. And we're going to create, hopefully God's creating as we speak, a platform for me to mentor young athletes, to hopefully prevent someone living in their car contemplating suicide in the depths of addiction and alcoholism. But if we can't prevent it, at least hopefully we can give them a way out if it ever happens. And so I'm pretty excited about where God has me today. The last thing I ever thought I would be is a home builder, but I kind of landed the plane with this. When I was being interviewed by my best friend who owns the company that I'm responsible for running, Gallery Built Homes, Bubba Van's his name, we're sitting at a table and he's just on me. And he'd been pitching this for a while, and I'm coaching football. Look, it's like, quit bringing this up. I'm trying to win a football game, So finally on this fateful day, when he gives me an offer my wife can't refuse, I tell my clients, I was like, Bubba, I just need to tell you, I don't know how to build houses. I don't even know why we're having this conversation. He said, Jason, I pay people to build the houses. God's telling me he wants you to run the company. And then it hit me. We prayed about it, but I could quickly tell what God was telling my wife, that I needed to hang up the whistle and get a real job. And in serving at that capacity for the last 8 years, knowing that Bubba may write the checks, but God's the one cashing them. And I just try to serve my clients like I think he would have me serve them. We've had a blessed life. And God has taken a homeless addict and alcoholic who lived in his car, and in short time made him the president of a home building company that develops golf course communities. And he did it in a way I can't take credit for any of it. And so that message gets shared professionally and anonymously on occasion, and that's my passion. I enjoy mentoring coaches. I really enjoy working with young athletes. When I moved down here, it was honestly, Coach, it was my foot in Texas high school football. It was an opportunity to build my resume, and the 5-year plan was to get the heck out of Brownsville so I can get somewhere where football is king. First book my dad gave me was Friday Night Lights, and how the circle of life brought me to Brownsville, Texas. And I wanted to get to Houston or Dallas or San Antonio and win rings, and it was about me because I could do it. I played professional ball. What I found humbly was just because you're a great player doesn't mean you're a great coach. Thanks to Coach Ramirez, he taught me that I had to change my relationship with the game. I'm no longer a team voted captain. I'm the leader of the organization. And my perspective needs to change. And the way I connect with these kids needs to change. Thanks to some really good men like Jimmy Cantu, my athletic trainer at Lopez, and the leader of FCA, he encouraged me that, you know what, you're training their mind and their body, but we're forgetting the spirit. And so what we had to do was lean into the kids in a way where they knew we cared more about them than we did the football game that they're playing. We did that. You know, we went 0-10, 2-8, 4-6, and then we started winning games going to playoffs. My point is, God used Southmost in this region to change my perspective, because Coach Mears was right. The relationship with the game had to change. And so now it's not something I used to play or something that I am, something I just used to do. And it's a platform he created that I can stand on to impact others, whether it be coaches or kids or superintendents. And so that's where the speaking comes up. And that was kind of a speech in its own right there.
No,
Coach.
hey, Coach, that's phenomenal stuff. And, you know, one of the things I'm going to ask, and if you can share, the addiction stuff. Do you, not saying you have an urge or something, is that something you still battle, or not battle like that, or it's just like it was done, it was, you know, you talk about, you know, the path that, you know, Coach Pennington helped you with and stuff. You know, you hear other stories and stuff like that. How does that, you know, how does that go with you? You know, how does that?
It's a great question. It's an important question, I think. And the truth is, the problem's been removed. It just doesn't exist with me anymore. I don't say that to be cocky. You know, I don't say that I'm cured. I believe it's a disease that I have a daily reprieve from, but I believe that, you know, my life today has put me in a position of neutrality. Alcohol, drugs, mind-altering substances are like a hot flame. You know, if I were to go turn that stove on over there, I wouldn't need to touch it to see if it's hot. I would know it's hot because it's red, or other things would indicate that. And that's really where alcohol and drugs are for me. My wife's normal, you know, which is to say she can enjoy a beverage on occasion. We have a bar in my family room that would rival that of a 5-star restaurant. She sees to it stays well stocked. We host gatherings. It's like being allergic to peanut butter. I just make sure that the waiter knows that I have an allergy. And therefore I don't go there. And I believe I get that reprieve because of the work I do inside of a 12-step program. In the anonymous rooms, in sorted areas of this entire globe, I do the best I can to serve and pass this on to someone else, because it was freely given to me, so I freely try to pass it on. And so I do a lot of work in hospitals and institutions and with the addicts and alcoholics of this community. Do the best I can to help them get to a place of neutrality, help them get to a place where they are put in a position of, you know, where it's like a hot flame. They don't need to touch it to find out that they get sick from it. So hopefully that answers your question.
No, Coach, it does. I saw that you've gone to some, you talk about the recovery communities and all that, the faith-based community, the churches. And one of the things, Coach, is that I'm going to talk about before we move into other stuff. I asked Coach Tino Villadialis, I asked him, what's one question you think I should ask Coach Starkey when I get them? He goes, talk about, you were a Division I athlete, played in the NFL, coached at some high schools, and you have a son that currently plays, correct?
Yes.
How, because I mean, I've had coaches here that they got to coach their sons. How do you able to separate that? Like, you're seeing your son play, and your son probably comes home and says, "Hey, Dad, what do I do here? And did I do this?" How does that go about, you know, with your son playing?
It's a good question. It's a challenge. It's one of the greatest challenges, you know, in this season of my life, is being a dad and not a coach. You know, it's funny you bring up Tino, because he's one of the men that's helped me see that more clearly. Because when I was on his staff in 2020, 2021, 2022, as my son was coming up, it became real clear to me that, you know, because of my playing experiences and accomplishments, and really connected to the kids, my son's friends, it became clear to me that I was the focus, and therefore interfering with his opportunity to have a high school athletic experience. And so working with Tino, we created kind of this consulting position where I can be up in the press box and emotionally removed from game day, but still involved in the headsets and, you know, and feedback with Tino. And we have a great relationship like that. But honestly, it's a challenge. You know, another young man that was in my life, Diego, he's really great too. Just reminded me, like, your dad, that's your biggest role. Coach Pennington, one of his great pieces of wisdom was, the greatest gift, Jason, you can ever give your kids is your presence. And so when I'm in the moment being present, we were at UTRGV camp yesterday, and he's engaged in a camp, and he's battling a one-on-one, and very, very good tackle he's going against. I want so much to insert myself, but I want more for him to have a whole experience. My dad did an incredible job of not getting in the way. He would fan the flame, and he did it very quietly and passively and without being boisterous or the loud big guy at the camp. And so Tino, his staff, St. Joseph, community have really helped me find this place where I could just be at peace with Reed and his pursuit of his dreams. I asked Reed we went to Texas Wesleyan last week, and on the way there I said, bud, are you still dreaming of playing college football? He said, yes, I am. I said, well, then I need you to understand one thing. This is your dream. It's not mine. I can help you sharpen your sword, but you're the one that's going to have to swing it. This is a battle that you need to fight. This is a war that you got to win. And regardless of whether you do or not, I love you and I couldn't be more proud of you. And then I just let him go have his camp. And then I get to sit there, take video, watch him. And then when he asks questions, I'll try to give him some answers. And sometimes those answers is, I think Coach Tino is the great guy to ask that question to. Or Coach Stoneball is a great guy to ask that question to. Or did you ask that coach that question? I just want to be dad.
Yeah.
And it's one of the greatest challenges. But it's also one of the greatest rewards.
Coach, usually on the podcast, what I like to do is I reach out to former athletes that you've coached and have been in your life. And I got to, Coach Raul Gomez helped me out with this one. And I asked him about working with you and stuff. And he says, one word that describes you is passionate. It's passionate. But also I got to, he got me in touch with Mr. Mando Castillo. And so he said, Mando Castillo responded, empowering. One word that describes you, empowering. Because the reason I use this word is because it comes natural to him to pour his knowledge and passion of the game onto his players. I met him as a sophomore when he first was hired at Lopez, and I didn't know I had the mental and physical strength or the knowledge of the game that it took to stand out as a football player. Through years of taking his mentorship both on and off the field, it prepared me not only to be a college athlete, but embrace qualities in me that helped me grow and become the man I am today. It's beyond football, and he knows how to blur that line best. So that's from Mando Castillo. So just wanted to share that with you. How does that, Lopez is how long ago? That was 2017, 2016, correct? So about 8 years ago, and he left a lasting impression on these players, probably among many other players as well, along with coaches. How does that resonate with you nowadays? With those type of.
It just gives me a lot of pride because this young man is such an incredible human being. We found Mondo playing in the band. He was carrying a tuba. And he carrying a tuba looking like a left tackle, And so, I don't know if it was Coach Gomez or Coach Ramirez, but we approached him to come and give football a try. He was extremely gifted, great feet. He played on teams that didn't win a lot of games, but he was a winner. And so receptive to being coached and being led. Those are the ones you want to win. I'll never forget, he played at Kingsville A&M. And he was in my office as we were, playing the game, right? And I love playing the game for kids. Like, that want to play college ball, I love nothing more than calling my friends and contacts I have in college and doing everything I can to facilitate an opportunity for them just to get looked at, right? And then invariably, they got to do the rest, And so we were doing that, and we did that with Kingsville A&M, and he earned his opportunity there. And then he went there, and it's not easy to be a college athlete. He did all the right things, and he worked his way up. I'll never forget one evening, late at night, it was in spring, and he was aligned to kind of be maybe starting that year. And he unfortunately tore his ACL, I believe. So it was a season-ending injury. And he called me. He was devastated. And when he got done kind of explaining to me what was going on, I said, Mondo, how's your grades right now? He goes, oh, Coach, they're great. I'm getting A's and B's. And have you missed any credits? You got a full look. He goes, yeah, I'm on track to graduate in 4 years. And he was already redshirted. Now he's getting medically redshirted. I said, so what you're telling me, son, is yes, you did have a setback, but because of the medical red shirt, you're probably going to get 2 degrees out of these guys. What a blessing that would be. And then he just, I never thought of it that way. He went on to start, play, do great things. I'm so proud of Armando Castillo. And his teammate, JC, was a kicker. We got JC up there too. JC could kick from 50 yards. I went and talked to thanks to, Escandon, state champion soccer coach, and Jimmy Cantu, really kind of bringing us together through our faith. I'm like, can I talk to the soccer team? So I talked to the soccer team. I'm like, look, kids, we got a lot of problems in football here at Lopez, but the kicking game should not be among them. Yeah. And so I gave them this pitch where if you come out and you make the team, I'll buy your soccer shoes. Football's got a little bit more money than soccer, whatever soccer shoes you want, but you got to be my kicker. It's got to look a certain way. Well, several kickers came out, and JC was one of them, and he was good from 50 yards. And so we got him looked at. He did the rest. He went on to do great things at Kingsville and A&I too, or A&M. It just brings me a lot of pride that I'm paying it forward. Because my life and the blessings I talked about today are the product of countless men and women's generosity. They've poured so much into me. I just try to pour into others. And these are 2 I'm grateful I poured into. Coach Gomez, I could go on about him for a long time. He's a great friend. He's the coach I've stayed in touch with since I left. We talk almost weekly, definitely multiple times a month for 8 years. That doesn't say I don't care about the other coaches that I've spent time with. We definitely text and talk, but Raul and I are really close. He's not only a great coach, he's a good leader of men, and he does it the right way. He's a big reason that Carlos and that program are doing it the right way. I want nothing more than great success to come his way, but he's an incredible father and husband and has a lot of integrity, good son. Even though I got his brother's name wrong, we went on a camp. Did you ever hear that story, Randall?
I want you to share that one because I asked about that one.
So, and it's Roland, right? Like I've confused myself. The real name's Roland. So we're driving to one of my favorite coaching clinics, and it's in San Angelo.
Yes,
right.
I remember that.
So they do just an incredible job. I've never been. Highly
Wade
recommend.
Phillips, right? Wade
Yes.
Phillips was involved in that.
And Gomez is the one that taught me into going the first time. It's a 9-hour drive, and I love every minute of it. My staff used to say there's 2 versions of Coach Starkey. There's third down and long, which no one likes, and there's Clinic Starkey, right? Clinic Starkey, we're all in the Suburban. We're all having a good time. We're listening to good music. We eat good, And so we're in Clinic Starkey mode. We're driving up to San Angelo to go to my favorite clinic there is. And we go all the way up, and Roland goes with us. Raul, my defensive coordinator's brother, who coaches with you in Los Fresnos. And so he's in the bus, and we're all going up there, and I'm calling Roland Randall. Nobody says anything. and Randall this and Randall that. We go all the way to camp, 9-hour drive. We spend the whole darn time in camp. I'm calling him Randall. We're halfway back from this camp. I've been spending 4 days with him, 9 hours up, 4.5 hours back. And I'll use good language here, but just use your imagination. So Randall's in the back, and I'm asking Randall to pass me something to the front. And finally it gets quiet, and Raul, I guess, determines this is the perfect time to let me know. He goes, who in the heck are you calling Randall? And now I probably get bloodshot red because that's a fear. I'm terrible with names. I'm like, isn't that your brother's name? He goes, my brother's name is Roland. And I'm like, God dang it, Coach, I've been calling Randall for 4 days. You're just now telling me? And they all start laughing. So, yeah, that's the Randall story.
Coach, we're going to change it up a little bit. I call this a 2-minute offense. But 2-minute offense, it's all it is this or that. First one that comes to mind. I always like to just see where we're at with this. You ready for it?
Yeah.
Here we go. Fruits or vegetables?
Vegetables.
Cookies or chips?
Cookies. For sure.
Early bird or night owl?
Night owl.
Save or spend?
Save.
Movies or TV shows?
Movies.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Pancakes or waffles?
Neither.
Really?
But we'll go pancakes.
Okay. Fishing or golf?
Fishing, 100%.
Pizza or pasta?
Pizza.
Shotgun or under center?
Under center.
Under center. Mullet or mohawk?
Mullet.
Peanut butter, crunchy or smooth?
Crunchy.
Chess or checkers?
Checkers.
Jordan or LeBron?
Jordan.
Montana or Brady?
Brady.
Brady. Beach day or camping?
Camping.
Onion rings or French fries?
Onion rings.
Barbecue or tacos?
Tacos.
Tacos. And the last one, Coach. Well, no, I got second to last. Christmas or Thanksgiving?
Christmas.
And the last one right here. Does pineapple go on pizza?
No.
No. All right.
I like that. That's good.
Yeah, Coach. It's just to get up a little bit, but we're gonna get into some more stuff that I really want to. And I'm gonna ask you a question that that you may have already reached on, and if you say, Coach, we reached on, and I'll move on to the next one. Is the lessons you learned growing up? What lessons did you learn growing up that stuck with you throughout your life?
Nothing in this world is for free. There has to be a price paid and a sacrifice made, if it's worth getting. My dad taught me that,
What is something you're still learning about yourself as a person, even in a stage in your life?
I still have dreams and ambitions, and I'm more than capable of pursuing them and achieving. It doesn't matter how old you are. There's no expiration date on dreaming and goals.
And the reason I like what you said there, I feel, is because of this podcast alone. This is something that about 2 years ago I had this in my head, and I kept saying I want to do this, and I said, you know what, I'm gonna do it. I had more time, and I said I'm gonna do it, and so I the dream part, I still dream about it, and there's there's so many people that I do want to interview, and I'm gonna get there, and hopefully now. In the very beginning, I only thought my mom and my wife would listen to my podcast because they have to, and I've gotten some good messages and some great comments, great stuff, and I just want to keep going. I just want to keep going, and so I understand about the dreaming part. That's something that we still have dreams, and we try to get them.
Good for you for pursuing.
I appreciate it, Coach.
Takes courage.
Yes. And you talked about a lot of mentors, but. Okay, I want to. Who is one of the mentors in life, and what did they teach you? And I know you have plenty of them, but if you can talk about
my
one.
dad.
Yeah.
My dad was my first and probably greatest mentor. I lost him November 20th in 2024. Was it 25 this year?
Yeah, so
it's 2023. So it'll be 2 years this November. And it's crazy, the investments that he made and the deposits he made, and the lessons that he gave. Now that he's gone, it's almost like I think about him more, and I see him come to fruition more. Luke Combs got a great CD out about fathers and sons, and a lot of those songs bring back some really magical memories with my dad and my pops. The soccer one was one. Anything we start, we finish. One thing I tell my son is the greatest gift I can give you is our last name. And the greatest gift you can give me is what you choose to do with it. And the sense of pride that my father has given me about just doing things the right way, treating people the right way, showing up with integrity and accountability and work ethic, those are deposits that are still getting returns today. So my pops, I miss them, I love them, but I try to honor them with who I am today and how I give back today.
Awesome, Coach. I thank you for sharing that with us. This next part before we finish is, I call this one good food or good mood. I mean, if we're not talking about food, I mean, that's I'm going to West Virginia, your hometown. Where am I eating at?
Well, where I eat is my mom's house. But if I'm to take you somewhere, man, it's college food that I most often go back and frequent, because that's my last season in life there. I was 21 years old, 22 years old. So Tudor's biscuit is mandatory. The Thundering Herd is it's this homemade biscuit. It stands about this tall. It's got sausage. It's got poached eggs, but it's still the yolk breaks. It's got cheese. And I'm telling you, the biscuit itself is huge. So the Thundering Herd with melted cheese at Tudor's biscuit. I'm going to get a Publix at Geno's. I mean, Geno's is a chain, but we do these things called Publixes back there that are pretty spectacular. They do a baked spaghetti there too. Jim's is an Italian restaurant. It's not really Italian. It's owned by white people, but they do a spaghetti that is just to die for. Stewart's Hot Dogs is a popular one as well. I'll just leave it there.
Okay.
Those are ones that I'll probably hit every time I go home.
What's your Whataburger order, Coach?
Now, because I'm on a carb-free diet,
okay.
I get I think it's the number 3 that has the triple patties, but I get it with no bun, just mustard only. And so they'll give it to me when they do it right in a tray with a fork and knife. Awesome. No fries, no drink, or I'll get a Coke Zero if I want.
If you're invited to a potluck, what are you bringing?
My wife. She'll figure the rest out.
She'll make something.
She'll make something. Yeah, it's probably going to be a sweet, a dessert. But yeah, that's Larky's area of expertise. As long as I bring her, then I'm okay.
I asked about for your favorite barbecue or tacos, which I know that I think probably out of all the questions I asked these coaches, probably the hardest one. When I asked that one, you mentioned tacos. Where are we getting our tacos at?
San Benito, and I always, you're going to have to say that. It's not Vaquero, it's...
La Vaquita?
Yes.
La Vaquita.
That one. I like Pastor because they do it. Gordo in Vegas is where I go, and they have it on a big rotisserie, and they throw it down like that. So this is the one in San Benito that does it that way. I love that one. But the one here on the corner in Los Fresnos, Marios?
Marios, yes.
Yes, I love them too. So I need to give them a shout out. When I lived in Laguna Vista, I would drive all the way up here to Los Fresnos to get our tacos and go back home and eat them.
And for Thanksgiving, Coach, what's the side dish you need to have?
Stuffing.
Your special stuffing, your wife's stuffing?
My wife's stuffing. She puts sausage in there, with gravy. But I also like green bean casserole. I like sweet potato casserole too. My wife does a good one of those. Yeah.
Gotcha. Coach, we're gonna finish up with 2 questions, and this is the one I was thinking about this one last night. And I said I need to ask this one because I think I think somebody will get something out of this. Let's say you have someone in their 20s who got in trouble with the law and is needing some guidance. What would you tell them?
Jesus loves them. That God loves them. I told you one of the greatest lessons is that nothing's for free. Everything requires payment and a sacrifice. The greatest payment that was ever made was with Jesus' life on the cross. And if we can get someone to a place where they can believe the magnitude of grace that exists there at the finished work of the Calvary, and if I can just give them some of my testimony about whatever they're in trouble with. I love prison. I go there often, especially when they let me out the same day. It's pretty cool. But you're not the sum of your worst decisions. You're not judged on your worst day. There's grace out there that's available. You just need to make a choice. And so I'm going to try to get them to the Calvary and let them know there's grace out there, and see where God takes it from there.
Awesome, Coach. Before we end, Coach, was there anything you want to share with people out there in the podcast? Something that I think we've gotten a lot of your message, and it's a great podcast, great interview, I feel. And is there anything you would like to share before we?
Well, I'd like to say thank you to you so much for having the courage to chase a dream, at this season in your life. I think what you're doing is incredible. I think the kind of people you're having on here is amazing. It's an honor and a privilege to be one of them. And as for your viewers, anybody out there that's a coach or looking into the coaching industry, I have an immense amount of respect for you. You don't get into coaching because you want to make millions of dollars. You get into coaching because you want to change millions of lives. And I believe that no one person can influence more people for the better than a coach. And that could be a football coach, that could be a basketball coach. But I think if you're in the business of influencing young people for positivity and world change, we can change this world one team at a time and one coach at a time. So I just want to honor the coaches that watch this and the people that are young people that probably want to be coaches because of coaches they have. you're more than just your wins and losses. The investments you make into our world, our society, and our communities is greater than any scoreboard on Friday nights. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for the opportunity to do this. And God bless you guys.
Thank you, Coach. Thanks again. And thank you, Coach, for being on. So we end the episode of One Time Out Left. I want to thank Coach Jason Starkey for coming on. And you can subscribe on YouTube to get notifications along with X, Instagram, and TikTok. Along with now it's on Apple Podcast and Spotify. And if there's questions you would like me to ask our future coaches and athletic directors, please leave them in the comments. Or is there a head coach or athletic director you would like to be on the show? Also leave a comment. Thank you.